Welcome to Coming Out, Stories of Action and Reaction, with storytellers Tom Cosgrove and Pat Mclear.
Coming out of the closet is a phrase that never really worked for me. I don't think of myself as having been hiding behind closed doors, but rather as being out in the open, wearing camouflage. You can't see me. Not a fashion statement that I would recommend. The camo fabric was loosely sewn together with pieced lies. We could only afford a one-bedroom apartment. It came furnished with a double bed. No, we're just roommates. She's dating a guy named, you fill in the blanks. And why can't you fly home for Christmas? Work, I lied. I didn't want to go back east for Christmas. I wanted to stay in Seattle with my girlfriend. I also wanted to be able to tell my family about this relationship, how excited I was. It was my first. But I held back. Why? Fear. Fear of all the things that did not happen when I finally removed the camo. In my autograph book from my 8th grade year, my father, Charlie, wrote, "Here's to my 4th daughter. Her name is Pat. She's one of the greatest, and that's that." My being a lesbian did not change his opinion. Both my parents loved me unconditionally. So why did I hesitate to take off the camo? The drama of it all. Martyr for the cause, victim of societal ignorance. They don't understand me. How could they understand me if I wasn't secure enough in my own decisions to seek conversation to attain understanding? I wish there had been a how-to manual. It's not as though my parents didn't have a clue. I didn't go to dances or date in high school. I spent my prom with my best friend at the movies watching True Grit. To this day, Deb still does a great imitation of John Wayne. My first queer crush, other than the nun who was my first grade teacher, was the counselor my freshman year at the University of Massachusetts, Sheila. The older woman. Wise, funny, smart, athletic. I loved hanging out with her. And I cried when that school year ended. It was my father who consoled me when we left campus for the summer. Sheila went to England as an exchange student during my sophomore year. I missed her terribly. Calls and letters were exchanged, and I began to realize that I was in love. What to do, who to talk to. Have you seen that how-to manual? During the semester break, I went over to visit. I was so excited, but I was also nervous. Dare I reveal my feelings? No need. Sheila made sure to tell me that she had walked in on her roommate who was with another woman, and how upsetting that had made her. Crash. I was walking on glass. I pulled that camo jacket tight around me. I was so fearful that if she knew my true feelings, that she would reject me as her friend. I wasn't willing to risk it. I kept the secret. During the second semester, I was the dorm counselor. And as such, I was required to attend trainings put on by the Campus Women's Center in an effort to make us more empathetic, understanding of women on our floors who might be lesbian. We had asked to write questions about homosexuality on 3x5 cards and then pass them forward to the presenters. Then they pulled a fast one on us. They shuffled up the cards, redistributed them back to us with the following instruction. Read the question out loud and then answer, beginning with the statement, "As a lesbian, I think." The dorm mother left the room, refusing to participate. The other counselors were tongue-tied, stuttered, made no sense. My turn? As a lesbian, I think it's none of your business. Oh, exactly, the dyke facilitators crowed. I'm sure I was pale. Did I just out myself? Later, they asked us to name women that we loved. Easy, mothers, sisters, grandmothers, aunts, nieces. That's where the others stopped. But I continued. Deb, Sheila. I was being honest, and that's when I think I outed myself to myself. Camo momentarily off. Over the years, the camouflage has been put on and then fearfully taken off. Removed and then fearfully put back on until the fabric was frayed and transparent and ready for the rag bag. Who did I think I was fooling? Nobody. The charade has had its funny moments. Years ago, when I was working at AWARE, the shelter for abused women and children, a coworker and I were headed north to do some training. And I had resolved that that was the day that I was going to reveal my sexual identity. After we had settled ourselves in the hotel room, I nervously blurted out that I was a lesbian. Candace's response? So's my mother. Truly the comeback that I had not imagined. And then she followed with, and so's my older sister. No way to top that. We went out for supper and have been dear friends ever since. When I consider the hows and whys of my wearing camouflage, there's only a handful of times when love and compassion have not trumped the homophobia card, yet it has been homophobia, my own and others, that has dictated too many choices and behaviors, making the metamorphosis from camo caterpillar to rainbow butterfly a long, slow process. But a process with steady progress, as evidenced by my wedding ring. No camo needed. Thank you. Please welcome my friend, Tom Cosgrove.
It was 1990 when my sister Trish, now that's not Patricia, and never, ever Pat, when she came out to the immediate family as a lesbian. The immediate family being mom and dad and the 7 siblings. We're kind of the standard Irish Catholic family. I can't say that it was a total shock, but it was a bit surprising. Although it did explain quite a bit, not the least of which was her long-standing and staunch defense of sensible shoes. Trish came out in a letter. The original went to my parents, and a couple days later, a letter went out to all the siblings. Now, when I started putting this story together, I contacted Trish and asked her for a copy of that letter. I knew she had one. She's a historian at heart. But it took her a while to find it. But she did find the letter. However, when she reread that letter, she said, I couldn't have a copy. Even after all these years, the feelings were that raw. However, she did say that I could read it, take some notes, and share that with you. So one day I sat down at Trish's kitchen table in West Seattle, and she handed me an HBO interoffice mail pouch, a remnant of her employment at Comedy Central in New York City. And in it was the letter. I read it, took some notes, and here, in essence, is what she wrote. Dear Mom and Dad, the path to health is built on truth and honesty, and I've come to believe that you are as sick as your secret. I've been hiding for years, and it's time for me to stop keeping secrets. There's no easy way to say this. I'm gay, a lesbian, and I was born this way. Sorry if it comes as a shock, and I feel cowardly writing a letter, but I found it too hard to come out any other way. However, it was time to take the risk to tell you instead of continuing to stand in the twilight, fearing all possibilities. Homosexuality is a part of who I am. And when I started coming out to friends, I realized that I needed to share it with you. However, there remains this enormous fear of exposure and rejection. I hope for a positive reaction. I fantasize about a grand realization, but really, I'm holding my breath. I don't want this to be a taboo subject either, a family secret heard once and never discussed again. And I want you to talk to me honestly about your feelings, concerns, and questions. I don't know where you're starting from, but I hope it's not a long road to acceptance, and I have faith you'll try. When you're ready, call or write. I look forward to our future. Trish. I wish I could say that I handled this well. I did not. I wish I could say that I was supportive. I was not. It wasn't that I was anti-homosexual. I was just really ignorant. Homosexuality was absent from my Middle American upbringing. It was never discussed or ever even mentioned. In hindsight, I now can see that people like my mom's friends from church, Bob and Bill, two bachelors that shared a house, and threw these fabulous themed dinner parties, they were gay. But my mom, she was deliberately dense. It didn't fit into her Catholic worldview. In 1990, I believed I was open-minded. I had no hate in my heart for homosexuals, and I certainly would never tolerate violence. But even though Trish said she had been born gay, I believed, like lots of people, that sexual preference was a choice. But I believed that since this is the US of A, you could make that choice. Just keep it over there. Trish had asked us to be honest, and oh boy, was I. I picked up the phone as soon as I finished that letter. I have a confession. I've got a personal issue where my mouth engages before my mind does. And as you might imagine, I have regrets as a result. Out of all those conversations that Trish had after that letter went out, she can remember only two. The one she had with my sister Sheila, and the one that she had with me. She remembers Sheila's because Sheila was so excited. Because now, no matter what she did, even coming home pregnant with a tattooed biker, would pale in comparison. And she remembers ours because it was so painful. I'm one of her more liberal siblings. She was looking to me to be one of the supportive ones. Trish and I talked about that conversation for the first time not too long ago. And the funny thing is, neither of us could really remember many specifics, except for the general tone of the conversation and the use of a single word. And that word, unnatural. I didn't intend to be cruel. To me, it was a benign word. It described homosexuality's break from our biological drive to procreate. But to Trish, it meant wrong, disturbing, perverse. She had taken the risk to share who she really was, and I had lumped her with deviants. She had looked to me particularly for support, and I had cut her off at the knees. Whatever my intent was, it was hurtful and deeply so. I do remember trying to salvage the conversation, but no way. And when I hung up that phone, I knew I had screwed up, but I didn't know exactly how and to what extent. I'm from a family of writers. And in that HBO interoffice mail pouch was not only the original letter, but all the replies that Trish received. And copies of the letters that Trish sent back to the replies. A stack of correspondence, all safely stored in the archive. The amount of correspondence wasn't really surprising. In the days before the internet, my siblings and I carried on a very healthy exchange, creative exchange of mail. You know, witty comments, fun facts, cartoons, and more than one practical joke. I pulled my letter out of the stack. I had mailed it the day after that fateful conversation. I had written it in the creative spirit of our ongoing exchange. And at face value, it was a note of support and apology. But then, I had marked it up in red as if it had been graded by a college professor. And here is that letter. Dear Trish, surprising news is not unlike an accurate hammer blow to the thumb. The initial shock quickly wears off, and the pain is not long lasting. Use of metaphor, adequate. You were brave to send the letter, and I hope things are beginning to settle for you. I'd forgotten that honesty, by its nature, can be cruel. It's all in how it's delivered. It's the difference between a bully, a stand-up comedian, and a diplomat. Is this humor? I apologize for my lack of sensitivity. Your road is difficult beyond my comprehension, and I know I have a long way to go to broaden my understanding. Appears sincere, lacks conviction. Hang in there and please keep in touch. Creative ideas, witty articles, and challenging thoughts are always welcome in my P.O. box. Yours in adventure and seeking, Tom. Fair attempt at conciliatory letter, shows promise, C+. Now, at another time, I think this creative conceit could have really worked well. But really, it couldn't hide the fact that it was just a pathetic attempt to fix what I had broken. And really, I still didn't really get it. The only thing that I knew was that I was the problem. I had to figure this out. I did not want to lose Trish.
Fall, 1972, University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Freshman, majoring in physical education. Yes, I aimed to be the gym teacher. So there I was in an all-women's dorm, a PE major, and a bench player on the women's JV basketball team. I was surrounded by dykes, but I couldn't see them. They were wearing camo. As I became more self-aware, they began to come into focus slowly. It was confusing. Women athletes, coaches, professors, who were lauded in some circles for their skills and achievement, yet ridiculed in others for wearing sensible shoes. My vision was blurred. I was having a hard time seeing my life after college. Where did I fit in? It took 4 years, but my vision did clear up, especially when it happened. Lightning struck, Cupid's arrow hit the mark, and the object of my affection reciprocated. Pam was moving to Seattle, and so was I. It was while living in the Emerald City that the phrase, the personal is political, went from one-dimensional, words on a page, to 3D for me. My baptism, as it were, came when we were going to attend a Holly Near concert. Holly Near, singer, songwriter, hero in the LGBT community. The atmosphere was electric as we made our way to the theater with hundreds of other fans. And then pow! Protesters, carrying signs, yelling at us, yelling at me, quoting scripture, making sure we knew what the afterlife had in store for us. I was dumbfounded. I didn't know these people. And here they were damning me. I was scared. And then I got angry. For 3 years, I lived and learned in Seattle, but that relationship had an expiration date on it, and so I headed north to Alaska. And I found myself in a circle of friends who encompassed brilliant, hardworking, dedicated feminists, both women and men, who made things happen in this town. And I was more than happy to hang on to their coattails, contributing when and where I could, as I continued to learn about the personal being political. I don't like your friends, was the rationale the landlord gave when he evicted us. What? You can't throw us out for that reason. I can and I will, because what are you going to do about it? We found a new place to live. Karen Robinson, a woman with vision, conviction, and commitment, hired me to work with children at the Aware Shelter. I was responsible to work with the DA's office, the troopers, and the local police in investigating child sexual assault cases. One day, an officer higher up in command informed Karen that he could no longer work with me. He didn't trust me. I was a lesbian. I was bewildered. Didn't my work speak for me? I was angry, I was frustrated, I was ready to quit. And that's when Karen told me all the things I needed to hear. That we were working towards the best interest of the children, and that we would not let one ignorant individual sabotage our efforts. It was Karen's use of plural pronouns that assured me that the next time I had to work with that officer, she had my back. Years later, when I left that job, that very same officer sent me flowers and a thank you note. Fast forward a few years, I head down south, go to Berkeley, come back with my library degree. I'm employed at one of the local elementary schools, but at the same time, I'm facilitating a long-distance class in children's literature through the University of Arizona. The evening we were discussing censorship, First Amendment rights, and gay and lesbian literature for children, especially the highly controversial books Heather Has Two Mommies and Daddy's Roommate. Class discussion was stilted, awkward. But the students left knowing exactly where I stood. Of course, school libraries should have these books, and we will. I had been helpless when we were evicted. But a straight ally came to my defense when my job at Aware was threatened, and I knew I needed a straight ally now. If my library was the only one with these books, then I would be accused of promoting the gay agenda. The inclusion strategy needed numbers. Every elementary school had to have at least one of these books. Ann Simons, then the librarian at the high school, was the ally that I needed. She was a veteran librarian who valued the First Amendment and was willing to fight for it. Told her my plan. She gave me a thumbs up, and we continued forward. At the next district librarians meeting, Ann, as our leader, asked us to review the two books and then select the one to include in our collections. Why either, was the response. Because all children have the right to see their families reflected in the books that they read, and family is in the second grade curriculum. Daddy's Roommate was reluctantly chosen. Deed done, or so we thought. What we didn't anticipate was that the district mail clerk, upon opening the box of books, would be thoroughly disgusted and then bring them to the attention of her friends, family, fellow church members, and then deliver them directly to the superintendent's office. And that is when all hell broke loose. Complaints were filed, meetings were held, letters were written, threats were made. A librarian's car windshield was stoned. Copy of Daddy's roommate burned. The fight was exhausting, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually exhausting. But as with all difficult situations in our lives, we are challenged to find the humor in painful situations. There's an illustration in Daddy's Roommate where the two men are standing one behind the other in an embrace. The opposition labeled this sodomy. I brought this to attention of a coworker, and he came back with, "Oh, now we won't be able to have the kids walk single file down the hall anymore." I so appreciated his humor as a stress buster. After loud, contentious, standing room only meetings at every elementary school, the school board bravely decided to keep Daddy's Roommate in our collections. A hard-fought victory for equity was ours. At the end of that year, the elementary school librarians were informed that our jobs were being cut to half-time. Coincidence? I was reassigned to a new building where I would be the half-time librarian and the half-time, let's come full circle, shall we, physical education teacher. I guess the administration had never heard Meg Christian sing her ode to a gym teacher. She was a big, strong, tough woman, the first to come along to show me being female meant you still could be strong.
In the years following the letter, Trish and I ignored the gorilla in the room. She pretended like I hadn't been a jerk, and I pretended like I was a changed man. I mean, I wasn't there yet, but I was working on it. As a matter of fact, I had done some research. And this was in the days well before Google. Research meant going to a library, using a card catalog, and having a vague understanding of the Dewey Decimal System. And you know what I found? Although there was no definitive gay gene, there was definitely a biological component at play. There was no scientific consensus, of course, but to me it was clear. My views could not be scientifically supported. And even if sexual preference was a choice, who cares? I had to start living my espoused belief of free to choose. It was a couple years after Trish came out. I was back in Washington, D.C. on a business trip, and I decided to stay over for the weekend and visit an old buddy of mine, Bill. I contacted Trish and invited her to join us, and she took the train down from New York City. Our first night together, Trish was reading the weekend section of the Washington Post. "Oh my gosh, Suzanne Westenhofer's in town." "Who?" "Suzanne Westenhofer. She's a lesbian comedian I worked with at Comedy Central, and she's here tonight at George Washington University in like a half an hour. Oh, we really should go." Bill and I looked at each other. Lesbian comedian? I wasn't so sure. Trish knew that we would balk at the $30 ticket price. Tell you what, if we can get to Suzanne before the show, I know we can get in free. And if we can't get in free, we'll blow it off. What do you say? We hailed a cab and took off for the theater. By the time we arrived, it was only 10 minutes before curtain, and no one was outside the theater, and the box office had a sold out sign. Trish ran to the corner of the building and down the alley. The gray metal stage door was propped open to the warm spring evening, and no one was standing guard. I stuck my head in the door. "Do we just go in?" Trish shrugged. "Don't see why not. We've come this far." And we followed Trish in the door. We hadn't gone more than a few steps when out of the darkness loomed this beefy security guard in a t-shirt 3 sizes too small. What do you want? Trish was trying to explain when I heard, Trish! It was Suzanne, and she was thrilled to see Trish. Are you coming to the show? We couldn't get tickets. I didn't know you were performing. Suzanne turns to the guy she was with, the show's producer, it turns out. Trish is an old friend of mine. Can we take care of her and her friends? There happened to be 4 comp tickets left. The house lights had already dimmed as we descended the center aisle. The Lisner Auditorium at George Washington University holds 1,490 people, and the place was packed. Our seats were right in the front row. I don't know what I was thinking. I mean, I knew she was a lesbian comedian, but to me that meant she was a comedian that happened to be a lesbian. But she was a comedian that specialized in lesbian material. I was not ready for this. I mean, she was funny, sure, but she was also extremely vulgar. Left nothing to the imagination. At one point, she asked all the straight guys to identify themselves. Now, there couldn't have been more than 3 dozen guys in the entire place. And most of those weren't straight. Now, Bill, he was obviously less traumatized than I was because his hand shot straight in the air. But me, I did not want to be singled out. Suzanne looked right at me. Please don't pick on me. The fear in my eyes must have convinced her that I would be absolutely no fun, and she selected someone else to harass. By intermission, I was shell-shocked. I mean, I wouldn't have even left my seat if I didn't really have to pee. I spotted the men's room from across the lobby, and I saw the line snaking out the door, a line of women. I joined the back of the queue and tried to fit in. And you know what? That line did not move at all. I sat there for a few minutes, kind of dancing from foot to foot, when I made a bold move. I cut to the front of the line. Excuse me, is anyone using the urinals? Thankfully, no one was. And I made my way into the crowded room. And as I stood there, easing nature, I had to listen to pointed comments about the injustice of being able to stand and pee. When I was done, I turned to the sinks. There was a wall of people, at least 3 deep, most of them chatting and primping. I fled without washing my hands. I joined Trish and Bill out in the lobby, and we were just hanging out, kind of just checking out the crowd. And I said, all of these women are gay? All of them? Trish was disgusted. You are totally clueless. Yes, they're all gay, every single one of them. I mean, it didn't seem possible. Sure, some of them look like lumberjacks, but most of them were far from stereotypical. Some look like CEOs and others like June Cleaver. There was every age, shape, style, and color. There was close to 1,500 lesbians in one place. And that's when it hit me. This was big. This was huge. This was bigger than I ever imagined and certainly ever experienced. There must be lesbians everywhere. I consider this experience my karma, my fate. I mean, I needed to learn, and since subtleties can be lost on me, I was given an experience that was far from subtle. We caught up with Suzanne after the show, and she gave me a bit of grief about my deer in the headlights look. But she was kind enough to autograph a souvenir t-shirt I'd purchased. It had her picture on it with her tag phrase, "Nothing in my closet but my clothes." She added an inscription to the woman I was dating at the time, and it read, "To Mila, it's never too late." Thankfully, most of Suzanne's performance has faded over time. But I still have that t-shirt. And although it's been over 20 years, you can still read the inscription. And although it's been years, I've never been tempted to toss that t-shirt out. Because to me, it embodies a moment. The moment when I finally got it. And not just at some intellectual, conceptual level, but at a visceral level, deeply. Homosexuality may have been hidden from me as a child, ignored by me as a young adult, but now I knew it was woven deeply into the world around me.
Sister Mary Annine was my first grade teacher. I loved her. I received my first nun doll that Christmas. Guess what her name was? My family lived just shy of 2 miles from St. John the Evangelist Elementary School, and I would walk home alone, talking to myself, singing, telling stories, playing what if in my head. But during Lent, I prayed the rosary in my pocket. A silent walking meditation known only to me, a young girl scuffing her feet on the way home from school. The summer before my 6th grade year, my sister Mary, 7.5 years my senior, was preparing to enter the convent. Instead of a hope chest filled with treasures like our 2 older sisters, Mary had a large black trunk filled with all the items checked off her packing list and labeled with Sister Mary Mclear. I was thrilled. She was preparing to live my dream, and I was living vicariously through her. The mother house, her new home, just over the state line in Rhode Island, and the day she was to enter, we were all dressed in our Sunday best to drop her off at Mount St. Mary's. It was a beautiful fall New England day. But really, the weather was of no consequence because Mary and I were both radiating our own warmth and light. And I was so very proud when she walked down the aisle of that chapel dressed in her novice habit. It was as though I was walking right beside her. My sister Mary never took her final vows. The Sisters of Mercy are a teaching order, and Mary was not an academic. So the evening that she called and asked to come home, my parents left immediately to retrieve her. I was devastated. It took me a long time to forgive my sister Mary for puncturing my dream. It took me a long time to talk to her again. But eventually, I came around. The Knights of Columbus would hold an essay contest each year. And when I was in the 8th grade, the topic was my vocation. I wrote, I rewrote, I read it aloud to my sister Mary, I edited. I won first prize. for my essay on why I was going to be a nun. At the award ceremony, my teacher came over to congratulate me. My mother looked her straight in the eye and said, "Damn you, you won't get another one." I wanted the floor to open so I could drop through. I was mortified. I didn't know my mother didn't want me to be a nun. I didn't know what my mother wanted for me. She never said, but the nuns did. At Bishop Ian High School, I was educated by highly educated women of faith. It was post-Vatican II. The women's movement had new life. Many in the Catholic Church were practicing liberation theology, social justice. These women were exemplary role models. And despite my mother's disdain for religious life, I continued to think that I was going to follow their lead. But I was uncertain. It was college that changed things for me. The more aware I became of feminism and the women's movement, the more awake I was to my own sexuality, the less a patriarchal theology was meeting my spiritual needs. I was no longer comfortable at Mass. Other faiths were explored, but nothing resonated. And I think Emily Dickinson may have known the feeling when she wrote, "I'm seated. I've stopped being theirs." I was spiritually adrift, no anchor, no compass, and it created a void. The void ached for years. And then I had an NPR driveway moment. You know, when you're driving in your car, you're listening to the story, you pull up to your destination, can't get out of the car, gotta wait till it's over. The reporter was talking about Unitarian Universalism. I'd never heard of it before. And she was describing what the fellowships had to go through to be welcoming congregations. None of this hate the sin, love the sinner hypocrisy. Homosexuality was not a sin. Homophobia was. Get out to the yellow pages. Where can I find one of these churches? The very next Sunday, I was in the back row, wide-eyed, ears and heart open. I was surrounded by people who looked genuinely happy to be at church. Families with kids, youth, elders, conservative dress next to people who were tattooed and pierced. The speaker that day was a rabbi. And during announcements, a meeting for queers was announced. Really, they said queers in church, and nobody flinched. At long last, I had found a spiritual home. That void was filled with a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And that patriarchal dogma that I had forfeited years ago was replaced with a covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of all people. You use practice, truth, and advertising. Kim and I were married at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Burlington, Vermont. The officiating minister, an ex-Catholic nun. I now have a small collection of nun dolls. And there's a statue of Mary and one of Kuan Yin gracing our yard, both of which are surrounded by prayer flags, waving their intentions out to the universe. My sister Mary continues to be a communicant at St. John the Evangelist's Church, where she is a tireless volunteer on behalf of social justice. We lead our parallel religious lives, each honoring and respecting the other's path. And on any given Sunday, when I'm serving as the lay leader at the Juneau Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, there'll be a moment when I think of my mother and all those nuns who touched my life, and I smile. If they could see me now. Go for it, man.
It was years after my introduction to lesbian comedy before I found out that the entire thing had been a setup by Trish and Suzanne. But Trish and I have traveled far since then. As a matter of fact, just this past Memorial Day, I was lucky enough to be at her wedding. She married her longtime partner, Pam, and now their marriage is officially recognized by the state of Washington. Maybe not in the eyes of the law, but Pam has been a member of our family for years. She's the calm to my sister's storm. She's my kids' favorite auntie, and she's a trusted and valued in-law. Our family would be less without her. Their wedding was a small affair held in the backyard of my sister Sheila's house in West Seattle. They wanted something small because, frankly, they've had more than one wedding. In 2004, they got married in the state of Oregon, only to be notified later that the Oregon Supreme Court had nullified their union. Sorry for the inconvenience. But it was their very first wedding, or more accurately, their commitment ceremony that was truly remarkable. And it too was held on a Memorial Day 18 years ago. On a circle-lined boat in the middle of New York Harbor, Trish and Pam pledged their commitment in front of a crowd that included much of my extended family. Siblings, cousins, aunts, and uncles. Not all of them were hip to what was going down, but they were all there to support Trish. And the party that followed is legendary. Anyone who was there will tell you it was the best wedding reception they've ever been to. For me, the highlight was floating at the foot of the Statue of Liberty as my extended family danced alongside the New York City lesbian community to the thumping strains of the Village People. I was just wild. I attended that ceremony with Mila, now my wife, then the woman whose house I was living in and thinking of maybe committing to. We had been dating for 4 years and living together for 2. We'd actually talked about getting married the year before, and we had pretty much decided that we would probably get married someday. But then Mila wanted to start planning the wedding. She soon got frustrated with my lack of engagement, said a couple of choice words, and told me the ball was in my court. We were heading back from the ceremony, flying nonstop between JFK and Seattle in a Boeing 747. We were in first class, courtesy of Mila's airline miles. After a couple of Bloody Marys, I screwed up some courage. So, why don't we get married? Mila was cool. I think we've had this conversation. The problem is there are some details involved in getting married, something you have an inability to discuss. Okay, valid criticism, but I think I got the idea. A stealth wedding. A stealth wedding. Okay, I'm listening. Look, Trish and Pam's ceremony was great. It was beautiful setting, heartfelt, incredible party. But you know what? There's no way I could have a large wedding. It's just too damn stressful. For me, if I'm going to do it, I don't want a long lead time and all those planning decisions. So what do you say? We get married on our kayak trip. My birthday kayak trip? Yeah, that's the one. The one we're leaving on in like 2 weeks? Okay, not a lot of planning time. But we've already got some great friends coming on that trip, and my sister Sheila's coming up from Seattle. We get someone to secretly sign up to be a wedding commissioner, and when we get out to the Berners Bay cabin, we get married. What do you say? Stealth wedding. Mila was unconvinced. However, by the time we landed in Seattle and she had had a couple glasses of wine, she agreed. We conscripted a couple of close friends into the conspiracy and swore them to silence. We even got the court clerk to hold off publishing the wedding license until after we had left town. And when the kayak group got to the Berners Bay cabin, we announced we were getting married the next day. The guests were thrilled. They jumped into action, planning and decorating. So, on a sunny June day, the day after Mila's birthday, Mila and I walked down the beach in our extra tufts, and under a phalanx of raised kayak paddles, we were married. The guest book was a $1 bill. At Trish and Pam's most recent Memorial Day wedding, I was one of the few family members in attendance. So they asked me to give a toast at the reception. I recounted an abbreviated version of my wedding story, the one I just told you, and I concluded it like this. To Pam and Trish, and the wonderful example they set. I followed their lead, and 18 years later, Mila and I are still devoted. We have 2 wonderful children, Natalie and Coleman, and a nice house on B Street in Juneau. But I want everyone here to know that it took the example of a committed and loving homosexual relationship to get this heterosexual to marry. So I want you all to join me in a toast, and I do mean all of you. I want to see the glasses, please. There we go. Everyone, we're going to do a toast to Pam and Trish. Thanks for showing the way.
Thank you. We are standing at a time of great cultural change. And there's a lot of theories out there about why this change is happening. But we think a big reason, stories.
A large segment of the population are people like me. People who are not by nature hateful or intolerant, but woefully ignorant.
And they're being educated by folks who are willing to come out to family, friends, classmates, co-workers, and put a personal face on the LGBTQ community.
These courageous people have told their stories, and their stories have changed the hearts of millions. Thanks to all of you.